Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
As if 2021 wasn't an interesting year in politics, it looks like 2022 is even going to be a more interesting year in state politics with redistricting and midterm elections in the offing. Now, I learned a long time ago that if you want to stay up to speed on state politics, it's very important that you pay attention to what our next guests talk about, and that is John Myers with the LA Times and Dan Walters with CalMatters. Welcome back to the Maddy Report, you guys. So John, COVID-19, I know people are tired probably of talking about it, but it's been in the news for 2 years. It's going to be in the news for the foreseeable future. What's happening at the state capitol when it comes to COVID?
Yeah, I think, Mark, we're starting to make the transition from talking about a pandemic to an endemic, right? This idea of a long-term thing that, while not an emergency, is still a nagging crisis that has to be dealt with. You hear Governor Newsom referencing that in recent days. He said he's going to lay out more details on what his vision is for an endemic structure in California. But I think really, if I had to put it into 3 buckets, I would talk about workplace rules. Then that includes vaccines and working remotely, working in person, testing, schools, and what we do, same kind of things, vaccines and testing and rules there, and masking, and then public health funding, because public health funding was decimated in the decades prior to this pandemic. We started to spend some money there, but we're going to have to probably spend more money there. I think if you look at those 3 topics, that is really a shift from the emergency of a pandemic into an endemic.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that kind of maybe highlight here is the personal exemption on vaccinations. So Dan, what do you see happening? Are they going to make some changes in state law concerning vaccinations and maybe limiting that personal exemption?
Yeah, that's going to be, I think, the most explosive part of the politics of COVID this year is going to be whether the state mandates vaccinations for various in workplaces, perhaps, or some other venues, and schools, of course. And secondly, whether they're going to allow any kind of exemptions, particularly the personal exemption. And the governor's kind of caught on that one too when he kind of made a big deal about we're going to have kids, make sure kids have vaccinations. They're going to have vaccinations. And then when he got a little kickback on it, he started saying, whoa, there's the personal exemption. You really don't have to do it if you don't want to. And now there's legislation moving that would take away that right for a personal exemption. And when you start talking about what people have to do in their personal conduct in some way, that's when politics become very dicey.
Well, let me give you a related issue then, and that's water. Watering their lawns, taking showers, what have you. It's going to be another focus of the governor legislature, as it's been for many, many years. What's happening on the water issue at the state capitol these days?
Almost nothing. Almost nothing. There's the usual. There's always something going on in water in terms of there's some money in the budget for this or that or whatnot. But in terms of big policy, to deal with California's ongoing gap between supply and demand that has been going on now for years and years and years and years, there's really nothing happening on the big front. A lot of talk. There's talk about, well, we ought to build this reservoir at sites. We should or we should not build the tunnels under the delta. We should or should not start dealing with water rights, the agricultural water rights, and shifting some ag water over to non-ag uses. There's a lot of talk about it. There's conferences and there's seminars and there's monologues being written and stuff. But in terms of concrete action that would have some material effect upon California's water problem, I have to say there's really nothing going on.
So John, water, but there's also wildfires. That's another
Yeah.
related issue. What's happening on those issues?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, right, Mark, those are kind of two sides of the coin. I mean, as climate change dries things out and we have less water and we have more concerns over fires, the governor's budget has money for wildfire prevention and for firefighting in it. And he has money for drought assistance in there as well. But I think these are stuck in different places. For wildfires, we're stuck into this kind of this ongoing battle about both about insurance and the ability to get insurance in these wildland urban interface areas, the WUI, these areas that are building out into foothills and more remote areas, and homeowners being able to get the insurance policies there and the cost of that. And we're also talking about utilities and utilities responsibilities for fires that their equipment may have generated. But it doesn't feel like it's big and sweeping. And I kind of thought it was when Dan was talking about this, there are a handful of things about drought, but you don't see the mechanical things to really open up that larger conversation about it. And I think we're going to all be talking about water and wildfire a heck of a lot more in a few months. I mean, because I'm sitting in Sacramento and you guys know it down in the valley as well. We haven't seen any rain
Right.
all of January and into February here. It's a really concerning thing.
We're gonna talk up next. We're gonna talk about some other issues that have been on the plate for a while, namely homelessness, income inequality, and crime. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Dan Walters with CalMatters and John Myers with the LA Times about what we're likely to see coming out of the state capitol this year. The PPIC recently did a poll and found that homelessness, jobs in the economy, and inflation were at the top of the list when they asked voters what they think the governor and the legislature should be focusing on in 2022. So Dan, housing and homelessness, been a focus for years, spent billions of dollars to address the issue, still dealing with it. The state auditor was critical about how the state was approaching it. Where are we on this issue?
I think we're kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And a whole bunch of people are throwing money at it, particularly the state, but local governments as well. Federal government throws money at it. Money's being spent, contracts are being let, programs are being launched. But it doesn't seem to really be having a material effect on what Californians see on their streets every day. I've finally been going to downtown Sacramento once or twice a week after working at home for nearly 2 years. And frankly, I'm appalled at what I see in downtown Sacramento these days. It's pretty bad. And this is a town where their mayor has made homelessness his #1 priority. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. Whole sections of the town have become almost no man's land where you can't walk. The American River Parkway, which is one of the jewels of Sacramento along the American River, basically nobody goes there anymore. It's scary, and people are disgusted with it. I think they're getting compassion fatigue, and they just want something done about it. But frankly, the politicians don't know what to do. They don't know whether it's a housing problem or it's a social services problem or a health problem. And they just kind of scattershotting the thing, announcing this, announcing that, announcing this, announcing that, and the problem gets worse every day.
Yeah, John, $12 billion over the last 2 years, yet its homelessness is up 24% in the state. I mean, what's happening here?
Well, I mean, so $12 billion committed already and another $2 billion in the governor's budget in January. And that would be for more short-term encampments, behavioral health issues compared to the $12 billion, which gets into the program of using hotel rooms and things like that. Project Home Key is now called to use that. I mean, I think to Dan's point about the legislators and elected officials can't decide what kind of problem it is. I think the answer is it's all of those. It is a little bit of all of those. And that's the challenge here, is that there have been so many ideas and so many places. And I always feel like when we talk about the crisis of homelessness in California, there's a bit of a whack-a-mole issue to this. Like you try to fix one problem and another one pops up and on and on. You are hearing more people talk about the mental health end of this. And you are also hearing, and I think this is a really important conversation, it's going to be a controversial conversation. You're hearing the governor and others talk about conservatorship issues and the issues of whether you can physically tell somebody that they have to be moved into a place for their betterment to take care of them. There is a long history in California where things went wrong when people were in places that were not taking care of them the way they should. But that conversation is probably overdue. And if you listen to the governor, that conversation is coming back, and it's probably an important one to have.
Very interesting. What about, John, what about income inequality? We've heard a lot about that. Also, it ties into homelessness, and the price of housing in California obviously is driving some of these issues.
Yeah.
What is the legislature doing to address that issue?
Well, again, another very big topic, right? It depends on how you define it and where you look at the problems of who, the haves and have nots kind of mentality of a state like California and how dramatic that difference is in the state. I would point to a few things in particular that we've been looking at in terms of our coverage of this issue. First of all, I think we're talking about the workplace and people getting back into the workforce. I think you can't talk about that without talking about childcare, subsidized childcare, the number of slots of childcare slots across California for families to get the adults, the parents back into the workplace. They've got to have a place to keep those kids. Transitional kindergarten is going to be part of that. So I think there's a huge component there about young kids and their education and taking care of them. I think there are issues about tax credits. The state's earned income tax credit had a lot of success. I think you're going to hear more about that. The Golden State stimulus payments, which was kind of a fancy name last year for giving people stipends during the pandemic, were seen as a boon to helping people who are on the low income, on the lower ends of the income scale. But it's a big topic, Mark. And again, I think it depends on how you define inequality. There are a lot of middle class Californians who feel stretched with gas costs and rent costs and things like that. So first and foremost, though, I would say those issues of the people who are at the lowest end of the income scale, I think that's where we are having the conversation. It'll be interesting to see what we do with it.
We've only got about 30 seconds left of the segment, but I did want to get Dan's take on the crime issue. Seems to be, getting more into the public consciousness. Is this going to be helpful to Republicans going forward, or are the Democrats going to address it some way?
Republicans hope it'll be helpful to them because they can say at least, whether it's true or not, that a lot of this stems from soft on crime policies of lowering the penalties for crimes, of emptying out the prisons, and you can lay that at the door of the Democrats, and maybe it is or is not the real reason for it, but nevertheless, it's some talking points for the Republicans, and I hope it'll kind of help stem their decline in the political world. Yeah,
and the interesting thing though is, and while you do see a lot on the news, the crime statistics compared to, like, say, the 1990s are actually low relative to the 1990s. Be that as it may, we have more things to talk about up next. We're going to talk about education and healthcare. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Dan Walters of CalMatters and John Myers of the LA Times about California's political landscape for 2022. So, John, I want to ask you about this CalCare, the universal health care proposal that seemed to be DOA, didn't really go anywhere. What happened there?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the discussion over single-payer healthcare, right? And an effort by Democrats in the legislature to move forward on a program that would cover all Californians, that would have healthcare services largely administered by the state, paid for through some of the existing ways we pay for it, and some additional taxes. But that last part that I talked about there, Mark, that pay part is the part that really kind of stumped me, that there wasn't a lot of prep for before this thing came up for discussion in the last few days here in Sacramento. The cost and exactly what it would cost and what that would mean and how that would work did not seem to have been factored into the negotiations and discussion prior to bringing this bill forward. And I think that's ultimately what collapsed it in a lot of ways. I was surprised that the supporters were not more prepared to talk about the cost when opponents brought that up in the Capitol.
Yeah, that really, it is amazing, huh, John? Because, the Speaker of the Assembly, who's still the Speaker, a couple of years ago said, hey, the cost is a big issue here. The LAO came out with a report talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of cost associated with this. So, Dan, it was good for the Republicans because they didn't support it, but maybe it was good for the Democrats too, because they would have been clubbed over the head in some of these more moderate swing districts if it had passed.
Well, yeah, and I think that was a lot of why it didn't come up. I think the author of the bill counted noses and came up very, very short. He said double-digit short. So fewer than half of the Democrats were willing to support this bill. And rather than subject them to the election year feedback on bringing up a vote, he decided to just let it go without a vote. And of course, that got him in trouble with the Democratic left, the progressive wing of the party, which sees healthcare as a defining holy grail issue. But I think he did protect his fellow Democrats, and he protected them from both ways. He protected them from being accused of being wanting to raise taxes through the roof, and he also protected them from the left if they did vote for it. And it just wasn't the time to do it, and maybe there is no time to do it. I would say charitably, the whole thing was half baked to begin with. And,
well, the California Nurses Association was a big pusher for universal health care, but the California Teachers Association is another major influential group in Sacramento. And they're talking now about some changes in education. People understand that education is a huge part of the state budget. They're now talking about maybe changing it from state funding based on enrollments to attendance to those based on enrollments. And by the way, I think only 2 states, Texas and Kentucky, base that education allocation funding on average daily attendance. So, Dan, is that going to happen?
I think there's a pretty good chance that will happen because enrollment is dropping in California schools. It went down to a lot because of COVID, but there's a longer term trend of dropping just for demographic reasons. There are fewer kids, they have fewer kids in school. And so the school districts have all been really squeezed. The Oakland school district just voted to close 11 schools because of their declining enrollment. And yes, we talk about enrollment and attendance almost interchangeably, but they're not. Enrollment's one thing, but the funding, as you mentioned, is based on attendance. And with the COVID, a lot of kids haven't come back to school for one reason or another, and the school districts are feeling the pinch financially. I think there will be a change made, but there's also a downside to that. And the downside is if you start basing funding on enrollment rather than attendance, you give the schools a kind of an out on trying to get more kids in school. They're going to get the money regardless of whether the kid shows up or not. And so you could have a problem of truancy, of not really going out there and beating the bushes to get kids in school. If they don't want to come, let them go. We're still going to get paid for them. That sort of attitude.
Yeah.
So I think it's a pretty serious thing because this enrollment decline is a long-term trend that shows no sign of ending as the birth rate goes down in California, as the influx of migrants goes down, as our population growth slows.
Oh, well,
This is one of the faults.
Hey, John, I want to ask you, about that, but we've only got a little bit of time left in the segment. I really wanted to get a question here about the retiring state auditor, Elaine Howell, and how that process is going to play out. It's always been apolitical. Do you think it's going to become a more political process as they look for her replacement?
I don't know. I don't know how political it gets. I mean, there's a lot of difficulty in changing the way things have gone with having an auditor who can call balls and strikes independently. But we're going to see how that does play out. And I just have to say on the schools thing really quickly, these are big decisions about the future of California education. And when you asked about inequality, Mark, absenteeism is a big problem in low-income communities where they struggle for a lot of reasons just because kids don't want to go to school. So all of it has to be addressed holistically.
Lots to talk about. Well, up next, we're going to talk about not just the issues we've been talking about, but we're now going to transition and talk about 2022 as an election year. What does that all mean? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. As if we didn't have enough to look forward to at the state capitol this year, 2022 is an election year. So there's lots going to be on the ballot in terms of propositions and different races that are going to be run. We're talking with 2 experts on state politics, Dan Walters with CalMatters and John Myers with the LA Times. So Dan, I'm going to ask you first, we had this once in a decade redistricting. What are the implications?
Well, the implications are probably net that the Democrats are going to pick up a few more seats in the legislature that they dominate already, and perhaps in the congressional delegation as well. While the redistricting by the commission was not overtly political, by putting emphasis on so-called communities of interest, which are mostly defined by ethnicity and culture, and trying to consolidate those communities of interest where they can, the natural effect of that is probably going to be more Democratic seats. But the state has changed, and the white population has been declining in relative terms, and that's going to be reflected politically. And so I think the Republicans are going to lose what little strength they have, they're going to lose some more of it in this year's elections because of redistricting.
Yeah, John, are we going to see Democrats for as far as the eye can see?
Well, Well, we're going to see. I mean, I think Dan's right. We're going to see, a big boost for Democrats. But the biggest thing that I would say, if I could, just out of not only redistricting, but a lot of what's going on in politics right now, is we're going to see a very different legislature in 2023. We are having what I would call, as I wrote for the newspaper, an historic exodus from the legislature. The people turning over, leaving to other seats, not because of term limits, but looking for other jobs and moving on. And I think it's a different legislature and potentially a different discussion. They may have the same party name, but there'll be a lot of changes, I think, come 23.
Yeah, no doubt. It was very interesting to read that in your article. I think you said like 30, you have 35 right now and counting. That's a lot of people. Let me ask you about this. What about the propositions, Dan? What are we going to see in the November ballot when it comes to propositions?
We're going to see a whale of a lot of propositions. They're going to be high dollar measures that affect moneyed interests, from the medical interest to the Indian gambling casinos to just about everybody in between. It's going to be a very high octane ballot measure picture with hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars spent for and against ballot measures. We may see as many as 4 measures dealing with betting on sports, for example. Huge money coming in from the various people who want to grab shares or even monopolies over that. We've got a renewal of the age-old conflict over whether damages should be limited in medical malpractice cases. We've got just a ton of things, and we don't know what's all going to be on there. They're still out there gathering signatures. New things are getting kicked on, but it's going to cost a lot of money to get measures on the ballot. Dollars, not cents, but dollars, maybe many dollars per signature. It's a dream situation for campaign consultants and petition gathering operations. They're all going to get very rich this year.
Yeah, I've only got 30 seconds left, John, but yes, this is going to be good news for frankly, TV stations and for lobbyists.
Yeah, and two things I'll quickly say to look for that could be on this ballot. First are issues about taxes, tax increases on wealthy people for particular things, and a new threshold to how hard it is to pass taxes by the ballot. Both of those could be on there. And minimum wage. There's a potential increase to $18 an hour for a minimum wage. That's trying to get on the ballot as well. It's going to be a really interesting year.
No doubt. I guess we stay tuned. I want to thank our always insightful guest, Dan Walters from CalMatters and John Myers at the LA Times. And thank you for joining us. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Institute.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.